Dina. That was awesome. That was awesome. Those big men are scary. They are. They're sweet. We need them, but they scare me. That's why I moved back down here from New York. Our next reader is Bayard Godsave. Bayard is an assistant professor teaching writing and English literature at Cameron University in Oklahoma. His work has appeared in Cream City Review, Another Chicago Magazine, Florida Review, and many, many more. Bayard's story, I guess this is, what? How do I read this? Bayard, 2 hours, 36 minutes, and 50...
00013658.
Okay, I was just wondering. It was very interesting. Was included in the 2006 in the Flash Fiction Forward, an anthology of short fiction published by W.W. Norton. His first collection of short stories, Lesser Apocalypses, was published in 2012. His second collection, a pair of novellas titled Torture Tree, which is right over there, was published by Queensferry Press in 2014. Thanks for coming, Bayard. We look forward to hearing you.
Dina, thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for coming and reading. And it's great to be in this store. I've never been here before, but that a store that only sells independent press books exists is really amazing. I think as the big publishers get more and more scared, they publish less and less interesting stuff, and so it's, you know, these small presses that I think are doing the best work. And I don't just say that because I too am a small press publisher, or I too am a small press author, I guess. So my friend Seth is here tonight. I've known Seth since we were in daycare together. So my earliest memories, if they don't include my parents, probably include Seth. And I think it's really awesome that he's going to be here, that he's here tonight to hear this, because the title novella in this collection, Torture Tree, actually takes place in Geneseo, New York, where we grew up. Geneseo is a town probably you've never heard of. It's on the Genesee River, which if you've heard of, you've probably heard of it because of the terrible beer that has the same name. But the Genesee River also marks the westernmost, I guess, terminus of the Sullivan campaign during the Revolutionary War, which a lot of people don't know about, but during the Revolutionary War, the Iroquois had sided with the British, and so George Washington selected, he had this guy, General Sullivan, rally up an army and go out against the Iroquois. And basically it was because Washington wanted that land after the war. He wanted that to be America's breadbasket. Because you know, we had all this farmland, but we were growing cotton and tobacco, which you can't eat. But Western New York is just really sort of this lush and fertile land. Of course, the problem was there were a bunch of people living there. And so it's, even before America was America, it was already sort of making these choices about what it wanted and sort of sending out troops against the people who lived there. And so in part, this book, the novella is in part about that. So I'm going to read a little bit from that, and then I have a story as well that I'm going to read. Torture Tree. Submitted on October 2nd, 2006 to the faculty of Dreyer College in partial fulfillment for the degree of Bachelor of Arts in United States History. The pages before you represent my thesis project, warts and all. They contain the story of a single incident, a small but unquestionably brutal skirmish during the American Revolutionary War. They also tell the story of me, Roman Menkowitz, and my family, and in particular my sister, Merritt, whom no one has seen or heard from in over a year now, since she vanished, presumably into the desert outside Baghdad. And I know from my advisor, along with several members of my committee and most of my outside readers, have cautioned me repeatedly that you, dear committee, will no doubt look unfavorably upon the autobiographical digressions, solipsistic contextualizations, and baffling non sequiturs that creep into the text throughout and have no choice but to deny me graduation. But I ask you this, isn't history, after all, a method of interpretation? And wouldn't it then be benefited by an understanding of its interpreter? You cannot understand truly the analysis before you without first understanding its author and the position from which he is writing. The pages before you represent my truth, my interpretation. I am their frame. Chapter 1. On September 12, 1779, Lieutenant Thomas Boyd and Sergeant Michael Parker, members of a Federalist scouting party dispatched from the 4th New York Regiment of the Western Continental Army, were captured by Iroquois warriors in the vicinity of Littlebeard's Creek, in the wilderness outside the encampment of Chinasio, 2.5 miles southeast of where the town of Geneseo now stands. Boyd and Parker were tortured, a torture whose duration spanned an entire night, and killed, their bodies left to be discovered by their fellow soldiers the following morning. According to most accounts, the sun rose early the morning of September 13th, but was soon after obscured by a bank of thunderheads. A steady rain began to fall around 9 o'clock, just as the men of the 4th New York were attempting to piece together the events of the night prior. The rain would continue to fall for close to 3 days. Such storms, if we can call them that, are hardly uncommon to this part of the country. Perhaps it has to do with its proximity to the Atlantic coast, or with its being situated between two great lakes. But there has always been something elusive and unpredictable about the weather over western New York, particularly in early fall. Today, a tiny state park marks the place where Boyd and Parker were found, complete with a greening bronze marker inset upon a 3-ton glacial boulder, describing them in heroic, near-mythic terms as valiant young combatants who died clearing the course for American history, prosperity, etc. This wayside shrine, the plaque reads, marks the place where on September 14, 1779, 2 young soldiers of the Revolution, Lieutenant Thomas Boyd and Sergeant Michael Parker, met death undaunted in the line of duty. After lingering torture, they marked with their blood the western limit in the state of New York of the great struggle for American freedom. Death undaunted, lingering torture. Obviously, the plaque, in addition to missing the proper date by at least 1 day, tells but a small part of the story. It fails to explain, for example, that Boyd and Parker were taking part in a larger assault on the Iroquois nation under the command of Major General John Sullivan, who had been handpicked by General George Washington himself, who had written to Sullivan that the immediate objects of the expedition are the total devastation of their settlements and capture of as many prisoners of every sex and age as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops in the ground and prevent their planting more. My first visit to Boyd Parker Memorial State Park was on a field trip when I was in elementary school. This would have been 4th grade, which means I'd have been 8 or 9 years old at the time. I remember the jostle of the school bus, the slippery smell of the green vinyl seats. Someone had drawn with marker on the seat back in front of me a crude image of a man in profile, sporting an enormous phallus, like a painfully distorted arm, the word "suck it" contained in a shaky voice bubble above him. It was the end of the school year, that point where spring has become summer, but you still have to go to school, and already the crickets and grasshoppers had begun to chirrup and whine in the tall grass along Route 39. Their pitch rising and falling according to a kind of Doppler effect as the bus ambled past on its way to the park. The park itself is little more than a narrow strip of land along the northwest edge of a cornfield. A row of old-growth trees lines the southernmost edge, and its green space is dotted with picnic tables and rusting hibachis. And at its center stands an oak tree, its enormous bole some 33 feet around and its uppermost branches reaching 65 feet into the air. This is the torture tree, where Thomas Boyd and Michael Parker were purportedly tormented and left to die. And there's a footnote here. This tree is the tree we've always referred to as the torture tree, with the implication that this was the spot where Boyd and Parker were killed. However, right in front of it, in plain view, there's another marker, placed there by the National Arborist Association in 1976, informing us that the NAA recognized the significance of this tree in this bicentennial year as having lived during the Revolutionary period. In all likelihood, the actual tree is gone, but this tree, which was probably still a sapling then, has come over the years to stand in for the original, and so we call it the torture tree, even if for the most part we all know that it can't be. That morning we sat in the grass cross-legged in a loose arc around our teacher, Mrs. Latham, who stood next to the tree and told us what 200 years ago had taken place on that spot. And this is the story as I remember hearing it. Once captured, the two men were stripped naked, the flesh on their arms and legs seared with hot brands. Then an incision was made in each man's abdomen, and a length of small intestine was pulled out and nailed to the tree, after which they were forced to march round and round it, so that their insides were slowly spooled out around the tree's trunk behind them. Corporal John Livingston writes in his journal of the discovery thusly: "We followed the Little Beard Creek upstream in the direction of Baird's Falls. Stearns and Murphy, who had been with last night's scouting party and who had managed to escape capture, provided escort. They remained largely quiet for the duration of the march, only nodding now and again in assent as the forward scouts looked to them for assurance that they were still reconnoitering the doomed scouting party's trail. The tracks were confused." In typical 18th century fashion, Corporal Livingston loses his authorial nerve here, leaving the details of what he saw almost entirely to the imagination, embarking instead on a long and tiresome bout of ethnocentric righteousness, wherein he condemns the savagery, godlessness, the usual stuff of the Seneca, and goes on to ask his readers what manner of people could be capable of such horrific acts of brutality. Anyway, on that day back in 4th grade, when after Mrs. Latham had finished with her lesson, we ate our bagged lunches, and then played kickball for an hour, returning to school that afternoon tired and grimy. The details of that day would soon fade under the erasure of memory, but the torture tree would become, for all of us, as it invariably does for anyone who's grown up in that town, in Geneseo, a permanent part of our lexicon, an iconic image, a part of a historic constellation looking down upon us and upon this place which has made us. Chapter 3. The last thing my sister said to any of us before she disappeared was, "I'm all right." It was early evening here, well past dark where she was, and neither of my parents had been home to receive her call. "I don't want you to worry," she'd said on their machine, her voice small, a kind of shush in the background like running water. "I don't know if you've been watching the news, but I'm all right," she said. And then she was gone, disconnected. "We'll not worry yet," they told each other. "She said that she was all right, and so she's all right." But you know how parents are. They didn't sleep, they didn't eat. They performed the tasks that made up their daily lives as if on a kind of autopilot. And it wasn't until 4 days later when they received yet another telephone call, this from a man at the State Department, that they'd been given anything akin to confirmation of their fears, that they had tried so hard not to acknowledge. She'd been declared missing. She'd not been seen or heard from in days, not since, it turned out, the morning she'd left that final message on my parents' machine. She'd just disappeared. My parents pressed him further for information, but he could give them none. He was sorry, he told them, but he had very little in the way of information himself. As soon as he learned anything, he assured them they would be the first to know. It was a terrible, terrible thing, he said. He could only begin to imagine what they must be going through. But he couldn't, not really. My father, since the day my sister was born, has never once doubted a word she has said to him, and this was no different. She told him she was all right, and he's held to that. The world as my father knows it is one that is marked at all times by her presence, her real and tangible being. She is out there, this he is sure of, and one day she will come back to him, to us. It was my mother who finally told me. This would have been last summer. I'd stayed up at school, ostensibly to work on my senior thesis, but I wasn't making a lot of progress. I was living in a little apartment above a bar, watching a lot of TV, sleeping late most mornings. I remember it had begun to rain, big gobs of water materializing out of the evening sky and plopping against my window. "What do you mean missing?" I asked. "She's missing," my mother repeated. "That's all they'll tell us, just that she's missing." She went on, telling me as much as she knew, then growing annoyed with me, or with my questions rather, questions she didn't have answers to, but still I pushed further. "That's all I know, Roman," she said, adopting a tone that was somewhere between guarded and officially apologetic. a tone I imagine she had borrowed, consciously or not, from the above-mentioned mid-level administrator from the State Department. "I'm sure she's fine, Mom," I told her, and I believed it, though that belief was based on nothing real or verifiable. I just knew that she had to be all right. The first time my sister, Mott, her name is Merritt, but everyone in my family has called her Mott since I first learned to speak and had trouble pronouncing her name. The first time she ever went missing was before I was born. And the story has since become a part of family lore. She was 2 years old at the time. It was my parents' first winter in the house on Elm Street, their second winter as parents. Geneseo was socked in under snow, one of those western New York snowfalls that comes in suddenly and shuts everything down for 10 hours. The kind that turns the sky a sherbety orange, while the snow skates through it in flakes as big as $50. My sister was by herself in the front room, which back then would have been dominated by an enormous black and maroon oriental rug that always cast a kind of gloom over everything. In the fireplace, the orange embers of a dying fire glowed and pulsed, while an Italian opera played nearly inaudibly on the hi-fi. At some point, my sister, in her pajamas and just tall enough to reach the knob on her tiptoes, opened the front door and stepped out into the night. I picture our front walk, which earlier my father would have cleared, but which would have been rapidly filling with snow. I picture the transformer box at the end of Elm Street, a mound of white, a dwarfed and misshapen igloo. It was so quiet, Roman, she would tell me whenever she told the story. You know how it is when it snows, just dead quiet, and you see in the snow falling all this action, all this activity, and it should be loud like when it rains, but it's not, and the quiet is constantly surprising you. And here my sister would pause, affect a kind of beat by taking a sip of her soda or coffee, by lighting or putting out a cigarette, by taking a spoonful of ice cream from her bowl, but not eating it. But it's also like you can hear everything, she'd say. Like I swear to God I could hear the river that night. There's always been disagreement over how long she was out of the house. A couple minutes, a quarter of an hour at most. But when the state trooper saw her, his cruiser, one of maybe 5 cars on the roads that night, she was in the street in front of the Wiener's place, 7 doors down. He followed behind her as she trotted slowly down the middle of Elm Street, her feet kicking up tiny sprays of snow. The trooper turned on his lights so that all around her pulsed a kind of deep and living pink. Then he stopped his car, got out, and chased after her on foot. I could hear all the stuff on his belt jingling behind me, she said, his nightstick slapping against his thigh. Where are your parents? The trooper asked her. He had a plastic bonnet over his hat, and the snow had begun to cling to it, blurring it against the sky. At home, my sister said. And do you know where your home is? My sister, a bright and fearful child, disdainful of authority even then, looked up at him, her eyes narrowed, unsure why a grown-up would be asking her so stupid a question. Yes, she said. The trooper stood over her, waiting. Well, can you show me? He asked finally. She pointed. When my mother answered the door, she was already in a state of panic, confused at first by the sight of a New York State trooper standing on her front porch, her daughter propped on his hip. Merritt, my mother said, oh my God, are you okay? The trooper handed my sister over. Looks like she got away from you, he said. Then his tone grew earnest. It was like he was giving Mom this lecture, you know, Mott once told me. After a while, she set me down, and I remember staring at the purple stripe running down his pants leg, at the bullets on his belt. And it was like he was talking at Mom, like she was an idiot or something. And she's just nodding and saying, sure. And he's like, you really have to keep an eye on them. And in this kind of copyese, he's like, you have to be more cognizant of your child's whereabouts. Cognizant. But it totally wasn't her fault. I mean, I ran away. Me, fucking asshole cop. Since then, Mott has gone missing from malls and grocery stores, on class trips, once at the Rochester Planetarium, once at the Corning Museum of Glass, once for 2.5 hours in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. She has disappeared in France, Italy, and the United Kingdom, at theme parks and in resort towns. She took up residence once for half a day underneath the Hersman's porch. But she always came back, even after her last big disappearance, second to the last before she was officially declared missing. When she took off with her boyfriend for Austin, from which all of us worried she might never return, Mock came back to us even then. Reading from it for, I guess, about 2 months now. It's 2 really, really, really long pieces, and so I've been reading from it, but I've never really been able to read with a sense of an ending. So I decided to bring a short story with me tonight, so I could read something that actually finishes. And this one's set in Oklahoma, which is where I call home now. But I think the 2 people who are in this story are actually based on people who I grew up with. So Seth, you probably know who these, you might be able to figure out who at least one of them is. So this is called Snakeball. Joey Rigoletto is a spaz. We know this. What a dickhead, we said as he went by, tipped over practically, calling out, "Snakeball! There's a snakeball," he shouted, under the Rainbow Bridge. This, the Rainbow Bridge, takes its name not for its colors, yellow and brown mostly, but for its shape, which arcs high over the brackish inlet at the western edge of Duncan Lake, so that you can get from the concession stand over by the Crappie House to the sandy stretch of Tribby Beach, which is the only 100 or so feet of shoreline around the entire lake that isn't given over to rock or repurposed concrete, without having to wade your way through what is, for all intents and purposes, a swamp. A swamp with snakes in it. Snakes that, when spring turns into summer, take to mating. They're water snakes mostly, that like the sun-warmed shallows of the inlet, and when it comes to such things, mating that is, have a predilection for group settings. Scores of them, and not much thought given to discriminating between species either. Moccasins, all mixed up with bull snakes and Texas king snakes, come together in one coiling, writhing ball of scale and muscle and vertebra and eyes unblinking, and it's just about the most depraved sight you will ever see. May had already turned hot, and the afternoon air was slow, and it was like the whole earth's insects rattled its edges. There wasn't a thing going to happen, and that wasn't going to change anytime soon. So when we saw Joey Rigoletto go by, we figured to follow after him. In his hand was a 32-ounce Stripes cup, and in his wake lingered the beautiful blue smell of unleaded gasoline. This, carrying around gasoline in a styrofoam cup, was illegal, first of all, and second of all, stupid. The first we could give a shit about. The second, the act's stupidity, was of some concern to us, and reason for, or perhaps better to say confirmation of, our thinking that Joey Rigoletto was a spaz. Joey, we said, that gas is going to eat through that cup. Joey, we said, that shit is going to corrode right into your hand. And it was only after we'd said all this that we finally thought to ask, "Hey Joey, what are you going to do with that gasoline?" But by then he'd already pounded up and over the slope of Rainbow Bridge. We watched as first his shapeless gray sneakers disappeared down the other side of the bridge's apex, then his socks, then the knobs of his knees, then the hand with the Stripes cup and the gasoline, then the chevron of sweat on his shirt back, then his narrow shoulders, and finally his flat top. We followed up after him, and when he came again into view, he was leaning over the railing, a long noodle of spit dangling from his lips, which were pursed out around the protuberance of his braces. During lunch at school, these collected great chunks of egg salad from the sandwiches he ate until his grin became a noxious tangle of hard-boiled yolk. And this was another reason we called him a spaz. "Don't do that," we told him, meaning the spitting. "It's ignorant." "They don't care," he said. "They're all just too busy screwing." And certainly they were busy at that. The smut of it could make your stomach turn. We, remember, were boys then and eager consumers of smut. But this was no hastily drawn lady, spread-eagled, twin V's for breasts. The audacity of their performance and their willingness to do it in the brightness of the afternoon bespoke a bravery, a self-assurance that none of us could ever hope to possess. Some of them lay stretched out along the dead and naked wood tangles, their bodies drying in the sun. Others wallowed white-belly in the froth. Most of them, though, just went along tensing and coiling together according to some ancient drive towards spasm. Joey Rigoletto held the Stripes cup over the inlet, pinched in his hand till the styrofoam lip gave and popped into a V, and the gasoline dribbled down and whirled in rainbow colors all over the water's surface. As the snakes sluiced through it, their bodies became rainbow colored too. When he'd emptied the cup, he let it fall down after, where it floated and bobbed on the brown water up along the snake ball. And from the pocket of his cut-off dungarees, he produced a book of matches, its striking pad smeared with frequent and insistent use. In the sunlight, we could not see their flames as he struck one match after the other. We could hear them pop, though, and taste the sulfur on the backs of our tongues. One and another he dropped them, but somewhere between the railing and the water they all went dead. "Are you sure you had them lit?" we said. "And yeah, I lit them," he said. "Shit." So we took the matches from him and gave it a try ourselves, but our luck turned out no better. "Here," Joey Rigoletto said, "hold on." And once more he disappeared, this time down the far slope of Rainbow Bridge. Over above the sun-dazzled lake, the ancient crappie house stood atop its pilings. From the promenade that encircled it, the old soaks had hung their lines. There, too, Adam Towson had hung his. No old soak, but a boy our age, Adam Towson was an omnivorous terrorizer not just of the desperate and dweebish like Joey Rigoletto, but of regular kids like us as well. He fished and spat into the water, and we watched him from our vantage and said nothing. We looked down at the empty matchbook as if some fate or fortune was written on it. Then Joey Rigoletto reappeared on the soggy banks beneath the Rainbow Bridge, stepping gingerly out on a branch tangle, towing his way closer to the snake ball. From his other pocket of his cut-offs, he produced another book of matches. He plucked one free from its cohort and held its head down against the striking pad and stood for a trembling white moment before, with a single movement, he popped the match head and arced it through the hot air. Nothing happened. We laughed at his failure. We laughed for the tremendous possibility of what he might do. "Be careful, dickhead," we hollered down at him, but we said those words through laughter, and so they only served to encourage him. He popped another match, another after that. We catcalled down to him. We harassed him for his ineptitude. On the fourth match, the gasoline caught with an atmospheric thrum like an oven kicking on. On our faces were frozen the countenances of mirth, our mouths open, though from them no sound came. Oh, what a holocaust it was. At first, none of the snakes seemed to notice that the water above them was in flame. Then the flames or their heat tripped off some panic in them, and they slashed through the burning water in a holy terror. A few of them, alight, darted for the deeper and cooler parts of the lake's inlet. Joey Rigoletto looked up smiling to us for our approval. But we only watched aghast over what he'd done. Some of the gasoline must have sloshed onto his shoes and clothes while he'd carried it up the bridge, because now there were little flames zagging up his shoelaces. Now the fringe of his cutoffs was on fire. Now his shirt too had caught. When he realized the flames were upon him, he panicked. A terrible thing to watch, a human being in an instant gone animal. His body told him to seek water, even if the flames still flickered here and there across its surface, but his feet betrayed him. In his hurry, the limb tangles shifted, and his ankle turned, and he went down on the branches. The water so near, and yet for all he was twisted up in them, he may as well have been afire in some desert. The woodpile sprang and stretched like a hammock beneath him, and his free arm waved frantically, the flames that ran up it disappearing and coming back as he dragged them through the air above him like a banner. Up on the crappie house, the old soaks took notice of the commotion, but neither did they come rushing to Joey Rigoletto's aid. It was Adam Towson, stoned on pot and his mind abuzz with meanness, surely, who came bounding down the crappie house's gangway. The muck in the inlet's bottom slurped at his loose-tied basketball shoes and eventually pulled first one and then the other off as he high-stepped through the water. His shoulders rolled like a running back's and his head bobbed side to side. He brought his two big hands down on Joey Rigoletto's chest, taking hold of his shirt, pulled him off the pale and tangled woodpile and plunged him into the water like Joey was a sinner needing rebirth. The boy thrashed while Adam Towson held him under, and when he let go, Joey emerged wet and pink, his mouth in a great off-center O as he gulped the bright air into his lungs. He fell down and got up again. Adam Towson stood in the knee-deep water next to him, panting and exhausted, and doubled over. He was okay. Thank God he was okay. The rest of his life, he would have one weird-looking ear, but shit, think how much worse it could have been. We thundered down the bridge to the banks of the inlet, and some of us waded in and put our hands on him. Adam, you saved his life, we said. Adam Towson had yet to catch his breath. He spit and pulled a long, whistling draft of air in through his nose. He didn't say anything. He just looked at us. But that look, in a single instant, the beatings, the fear he'd struck in us, all the ways he'd made us small, the time he pegged one of us in the neck with the padlock from our own gym locker, all of that was made justified. In the coming years, towards high school's end, we'd take Joey Rigoletto as a kind of mascot for our group. It wasn't that we liked him, or were even all that nice to him, but our meanness toward him became a grinning and winking kind of meanness. Sometimes we wonder if he was really as oblivious as he let on, or if he just played at obliviousness, grinning and winking being preferable to a smack in the head, grinning and winking being preferable to getting called an asshole. We still break his balls every now and again, but we're grown up, and so is he, and it's the God of honest truth that we like him. We were kids back then, and kids have to learn not to be dickheads. It takes time is all. Adam Towson is no saint either. He did some terrible things in his life, after he was old enough to know better. But they locked him up a while, and he reformed. The system worked. His boy shot a bear last fall that was charging their blind. They ran a story about it in the Banner, which was even picked up later in the Lawton Constitution. And you could tell in what all he said that his heart was swelled by the whole thing and was about to brim over. Joey Rigoletto ran a half marathon. That was in the Banner too, along with a picture of him running. He looks like an old man, his face grooved and creased around his pouchy catfish mouth, but he looked like an old man even when he was a kid, so sometimes the phone will ring late, after our wives and children have gone off to bed. It hurts every now and again to piss, the voices say. I'm terrified what'll come of my boys. How in hell did we get to this place? God's sons will say, they will keep you up with worry. You got to eat more garlic. You're a good man, we say. You're a good man, we say again, into the silence of one ear listening. The hum of all that air our words must pass through. Then this, that, and some other things. That crazy little bastard, we say. He just lit those sons of bitches up, didn't he? Snake ball, he was hollering. There's a snake ball under Rainbow Bridge. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bayard. It was wonderful. And it was great to be able to hear a story that ended. But I do like my readers giving people kind of an enticement to want to finish the story by buying the book. But no, thank you both. It was wonderful. And thank you so much for coming tonight. Please come back.